You were never meant to be ordinary. And that is precisely why he couldn't hold you. Some people walk through life seeking comfort, predictability, and reflection, someone who mirrors their fears so they never have to confront them. And then there are people like you. You disrupt patterns. You awaken questions. You carry depth that cannot be skimmed and presence that cannot be ignored. When he met you, he didn't just meet a woman, he met a mirror, and not everyone is brave enough to look at themselves. At first, your difference fascinated him. Your clarity felt refreshing. Your independence felt exciting. But slowly, what once intrigued him began to intimidate him. Because you were not like other women, not in the way society trains women to shrink, to soften their truth, or to dim their insight. And now, in the quiet moments, long after you walked away, regret has settled in, not because you begged, not because you chased, but because your absence exposed what he lost. Let us understand why. You saw him clearly long before he ever realized it. Not just the version he presented to the world, but the quieter layers beneath, the doubts he never voiced, the fears he avoided naming, the unresolved fragments of himself he kept hidden even from his own awareness. You didn't analyze him with judgment, nor did you dissect him with cruelty. You simply noticed, and that kind of seeing is rare because it requires presence, intuition, and emotional courage. Most people look only at what is convenient. You looked at what was true. From the beginning, there was something different about how you listened. You didn't just hear his words, you felt the weight behind them. When he laughed too easily, you sensed what he was avoiding. When he grew distant, you felt the internal conflict he couldn't articulate. You recognized patterns not because you were searching for flaws, but because your awareness naturally reached beneath the surface. This kind of perception often develops in people who have spent time understanding themselves, people who have faced their own shadows and learned that ignoring inner truth only deepens confusion. You were not perfect, but you were conscious. And consciousness has a way of unsettling those who are still asleep to themselves. At first, your clarity felt comforting to him. There was relief in being understood without having to explain every thought. He felt safe in your presence because, for once, he didn't have to perform. You created a space where he could exist without armor, where silence didn't feel threatening and honesty didn't feel like a trap. Many people mistake this for simple compatibility, but it was something deeper. You were offering him a reflection of himself, accurate, gentle, and unfiltered. And while that can feel like intimacy, it can also feel like exposure. As time passed, the very thing that drew him to you began to disturb him. Because to be truly seen is to be confronted with responsibility. When someone recognizes your emotional patterns, your defenses, your inconsistencies, it becomes harder to deny them. Your presence quietly asked questions he wasn't prepared to answer. Why do I withdraw when things become real? Why do I resist vulnerability? Why do I repeat the same cycles while longing for something different? You never asked these questions out loud, yet they existed in the space between you. And that space became uncomfortable. Many people carry an unconscious fear of being fully known. It threatens the stories they tell themselves about who they are. He had learned, perhaps early in life, that survival meant hiding certain emotions, avoiding certain truths, and maintaining control. You disrupted that structure, not by force, but by awareness. You didn't push him to change, but your clarity made stagnation visible. And what is visible can no longer be ignored without inner tension. There were moments when he sensed that you understood him better than he understood himself. Instead of feeling supported by this, he felt exposed. It's a paradox of human psychology that being deeply understood can feel more frightening than being misunderstood. Misunderstanding allows us to remain hidden. Understanding invites transformation, and transformation requires letting go of familiar defenses, even when they are painful, but known. You noticed when his words didn't align with his actions. You felt the distance between intention and behavior. You didn't accuse him, but your awareness lingered like a quiet mirror. Mirrors don't argue. They simply reflect, and not everyone likes what they see when they are reflected honestly. Rather than turning inward to explore what was being revealed, he turned away from the reflection itself. This is often how avoidance begins, not with anger, but with discomfort. He may have told himself stories to justify pulling back, that you were too intense, too perceptive, too deep. But beneath those explanations was a simpler truth. You saw him, and he wasn't ready to see himself. It was easier to distance himself from the one who noticed than to confront what was being noticed. In everyday life, this happens more often than people realize. A partner who points out emotional patterns is labeled overthinking. A person who senses inconsistency is called too sensitive. These labels are defenses. They protect the ego from facing its own blind spots. You became a symbol of that threat, not because you were wrong, but because you were accurate. And still, you did not try to force awareness upon him. You did not demand confessions or revelations. You allowed him the freedom to choose his pace. But awareness has a way of working silently. Even when ignored, it leaves an imprint. Somewhere within him, he knew that you understood something essential about him. And that knowledge lingered, even as he tried to escape it. When distance grew and the connection weakened, you felt the shift before he ever acknowledged it. Your intuition sensed the withdrawal, the subtle emotional retreat. You may have hoped, briefly, that he would step into the discomfort and grow. But growth cannot be coursed. It must be chosen. And he chose familiarity over truth. Walking away from someone who sees you clearly does not erase what was seen. It only removes the witness. Over time, he may have noticed the absence, not just of you, but of the depth you brought into his life. Conversations felt flatter. Connections felt less revealing. Something essential was missing, though he may not have had the language to name it. Regret, when it comes, does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in moments of reflection, when distractions fade and inner questions resurface. In those moments, he may remember how you understood him without judgment, how you recognized his struggles without trying to control them. He may realize that what felt threatening was actually an invitation to become more whole, more conscious, more aligned with his own truth. You were never meant to shrink your awareness to make someone else comfortable. Your ability to see clearly is not a flaw. It is a strength. It reflects a relationship with yourself that many never develop. And while it may have cost you a connection that couldn't meet you at that depth, it preserves something far more important, your integrity. To see clearly and still remain compassionate is not common. It requires inner work, self-reflection, and the courage to face one's own shadows. You did that work. He had not yet begun. And that difference, more than anything else, is why he wasn't ready to be seen. You didn't need him. Not really. Not in the way so many people convince themselves that they do. You weren't waiting for him to complete you, to validate you, to make your life whole. You already were whole. Your strength didn't come from his presence, and your happiness didn't depend on his approval. You had your own world, your own dreams, your own sense of purpose, and yet you chose him. That choice was deliberate, conscious, and full of intention. It wasn't born from desperation or loneliness. It was born from desire, curiosity, and a willingness to share a part of your already complete life with someone who felt worthy. Many people mistake need for love. They confuse attachment for connection, desperation for desire. They stay in relationships because they fear being alone, or because they think love must be tethered to dependency. You were not one of those people. You didn't cling to him to feel alive. You didn't diminish yourself to make him comfortable. You didn't accept less than your worth in the name of companionship. You came to him fully realized, fully aware, fully yourself. And that is a rare gift in a world that has been conditioned to seek love from scarcity rather than abundance. He may have initially found this intoxicating. To meet someone who is already whole is thrilling. It's like standing in front of a mirror that doesn't just reflect your surface, but reflects your potential. And for a while, he may have admired it, even been inspired by it. But inspiration can be intimidating. There is a subtle pressure in knowing someone chooses to be with you, not because they have to, but because they want to. It is a silent demand that you rise to meet their presence honestly. It is a mirror that asks, without words, are you capable of showing up fully too? Psychologists and relationship experts have long studied this dynamic. Partners who enter a relationship from a place of completeness often provoke fear in those who still seek fulfillment externally. When someone is dependent, the relationship becomes a place to soothe insecurities and fill voids. But when someone enters from wholeness, the relationship becomes a place of growth, reflection, and challenge. Not everyone is prepared for that level of intensity. Some can admire it from afar, some can appreciate it for a moment, and some feel compelled to retreat. You chose him despite not needing him, and that made your love powerful. It was voluntary, not coerced. It was generous, not desperate. You offered connection without attachment, intimacy without fear, and because your love was chosen, it carried a dignity that cannot be manufactured. He may not have understood it at first. He may have taken it for granted, but in losing it, he will come to realize its value. People often recognize what was priceless only when it's no longer within reach. Real life examples illustrate this all too clearly. Think of two people in a partnership where one is emotionally secure and independent, and the other is uncertain, unsure of their worth. The independent partner loves fully, but doesn't beg or demand. The uncertain partner initially feels relief at the lack of pressure, but over time, that very absence of need becomes a source of anxiety. They are confronted with the reality that love can exist without control, and freedom can coexist with commitment. Many recoil because they are unprepared for that paradigm. Your choice to be with him was a gift he wasn't ready to receive. You didn't make yourself smaller to accommodate fear. You didn't pretend to need him to secure his presence. You didn't compromise your standards to avoid conflict. You loved consciously, knowing that love is not about possession, but about presence. And presence, when it comes freely and fully, is a power many cannot withstand. There is a subtle beauty in the difference between need and choice. Need is loud, frantic, and demanding. Choice is quiet, confident, and steady. It does not shout for attention. It does not bargain for validation. It simply exists in its integrity. And because of that integrity, your presence was transformative. He may have felt it as a kind of challenge, a call to examine his own life and choices. Being chosen by someone who doesn't need you forces you to confront yourself, to look honestly at what you can offer, and to measure whether you are capable of rising to meet their level of awareness and self-respect. The truth is, not everyone is capable of accepting love on these terms. Many people mistake intensity for danger, freedom for detachment, independence for indifference. They confuse the absence of need with rejection. They fear the responsibility of someone else's completeness because it casts a spotlight on their own incompleteness. You did not shrink, and he was confronted with a reality he was not ready to face. Your choice was a reflection of your power, not his. It was not a negotiation. It was not a strategy to make him stay. It was an expression of your life, your standards, your values. You extended your hand because you wanted to, not because you had to. And love given in that way is transformative because it teaches without forcing, guides without demanding, and uplifts without diminishing. In choosing him while not needing him, you demonstrated that love is a gift, not a transaction. It is an act of courage, because choosing someone fully while remaining whole yourself exposes you to rejection, disappointment, and heartbreak. But it also preserves your integrity and sets the standard for the type of connection you deserve. It does not settle for less. It does not manipulate. It does not compromise. It simply chooses freely and stands firm in that choice. He may have taken this for granted at the time, caught up in his own insecurities and fears. He may have assumed that your presence was inevitable, that you would remain patient and accommodating. But the truth is, freedom and choice always outshine expectation. You chose him while he could observe and experience the fullness of your selfhood. And when he could not rise to meet it, the relationship ended, not because of a flaw in your love, but because of his inability to receive it fully. This is why your love is unforgettable. You gave without need, offered without expectation, and invested without compulsion. You allowed him to see what real presence, real choice, and real self-respect look like. And in walking away, when he could not match it, you preserved the integrity of your heart. Many people never experience love in this way. They give pieces of themselves reluctantly or conditionally. You gave from a place of abundance, and that abundance is rare. He may spend the rest of his life reflecting on what he lost. He may notice how easy it is to be with someone who requires nothing from you yet gives everything. He may seek similar connections and find only shallow imitations. That is the quiet consequence of your choice. Not vengeance, not manipulation, not spite, but clarity. You demonstrated a kind of love that is hard to ignore, impossible to replicate, and difficult to replace. You didn't need him, yet you chose him. That paradox is your power. That paradox is what makes your love irreplaceable. That paradox is what will remain with him long after your absence is felt. You entered the relationship whole, and you left it whole. You offered freely, loved deliberately, and maintained your integrity throughout. And that is the mark of someone extraordinary. Not because you are better than anyone else, but because you are conscious, courageous, and unwavering in your value. In the end, your choice speaks louder than any words he could have heard. It communicates that love is not about filling a void or completing a puzzle. It is about honoring the self, honoring the other, and engaging in a connection that is authentic and intentional. You showed him what it means to love from strength rather than weakness, from abundance rather than need. And that lesson, once lost, can never be fully regained. You did not need him, but you chose him. And that choice was not just love, it was truth, it was courage, and it was freedom. That is why he remembers, that is why he feels, and that is why, long after, he regrets not rising to meet the gift you offered. You challenged his unconscious patterns long before he even realized they existed. Most people move through life trapped in routines they barely notice. Repeating behaviors learned from childhood, shaped by past experiences, molded by fear, and reinforced by habit. They live according to scripts they never questioned, scripts that tell them what they deserve, how they should act, how they should love. You, however, were different. You arrived fully aware, fully alive, fully conscious of your own patterns, your own needs, and your own worth. And in your presence, his invisible routines, his unconscious habits began to stir. He may not have noticed at first. He may have laughed off the subtle things you pointed out, shrugged at the moments you insisted on honesty, or ignored the ways you expected him to rise to the occasion. But deep inside, your presence was a mirror. Not the mirror he could avoid, not the mirror he could manipulate, but the mirror that reflected his own habits back to him. When someone operates unconsciously, patterns feel safe, even when they are destructive. They repeat the same mistakes because the familiar is easier than the unknown. And then you appeared, not to lecture, not to criticize, but to exist fully, and in doing so, you illuminated the cracks in his routines. It is a rare and unsettling thing to meet someone who holds a standard of self-awareness. It is unsettling because it forces reflection. He could no longer drift through life on autopilot, making the same excuses, repeating the same cycles, and blaming circumstances for his behavior. You did not confront him aggressively, but your clarity made stagnation impossible. Every time he repeated a pattern of avoidance, detachment, or denial, your presence reminded him that he could act differently, that he could rise to the occasion, that he could respond instead of react. And while he may have resented it at first, that is often the way with truth. It can feel like pressure, even when it is actually liberation. Think about the unconscious patterns that shape most relationships: repeating emotional withdrawal, overreacting to conflict, withholding affection, avoiding accountability. These are not necessarily conscious choices. They are habits, reinforced over years, sometimes decades, that protect the ego from discomfort. And when someone like you enters the picture, someone who doesn't tolerate games, who doesn't settle for excuses, someone whose love is conscious and deliberate, these patterns are suddenly exposed. They are illuminated. And illumination, even without judgment, can feel threatening. You challenged him by refusing to mirror his avoidance. You challenged him by setting boundaries that honored your own needs. You challenged him by expecting honesty, by expecting engagement, by expecting him to show up fully instead of retreating into familiar emotional routines. He may have felt cornered or defensive at times. He may have justified his own behavior by calling you too intense or too demanding. But the truth was, he was only reacting to the reflection you offered, the reflection of a man who could do better, be better, and love better if he chose to. Real life patterns in psychology show that people often repeat destructive cycles because it is less painful than confronting the unknown. When someone like you challenges that, it is not a threat to love, it is a threat to habit. And habit, more than any external pressure, is what people cling to. He may have felt compelled to defend himself against the discomfort of being confronted by his own unconscious choices. And in that defense, he may have pulled away, criticized you, or dismissed your perspective. But that does not diminish the truth of what you offered: a chance at transformation, a chance to break free, a chance to live consciously in ways he had never known. Every interaction you had with him, consciously or unconsciously, pushed him closer to self-awareness. When you refused to tolerate emotional manipulation, he noticed. When you refused to accept excuses, he noticed. When you insisted on transparency and authenticity, he noticed. And though he may have resisted, deep down he knew that your challenge was not an attack, it was a gift. A gift he was not yet ready to accept. You challenged him without forcing change. That is an extraordinary skill. You knew that true growth cannot be coerced. It cannot be demanded. Transformation requires readiness, reflection, and willingness. You simply stood as a living example of conscious choice, of integrity, of emotional presence. And because of that, he was confronted daily with the contrast between his unconscious patterns and the possibility of something better. That contrast can be uncomfortable, even unbearable, if someone is not prepared to face it. Many people go through life seeking external validation or superficial connections, but you offered him something far more profound, a mirror to his own behavior without shame or accusation, with clarity and compassion. And when someone encounters that, it is often more powerful than any critique or confrontation. You did not need to force him to see, you simply lived in alignment with your own values, and your alignment made his inconsistencies visible. That visibility is often the first step toward change, but only if the person is ready to accept it. He may have resented it at the time. He may have resisted, retreated, or even tried to diminish your presence, but the imprint of your influence lingers. Your challenge was subtle yet profound. It reminded him that love does not mean complacency, that relationships are not a place for avoidance, that emotional growth is not optional if one wants to experience true connection. And while he may not have been ready to embrace that growth, your presence planted seeds that cannot be completely erased. When people are confronted with their unconscious patterns, it often triggers one of two responses: growth or retreat. Growth requires courage, humility, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Retreat is the default because it feels safer to return to familiar behavior than to step into the unknown. You were not there to manipulate which path he would take. You were simply there to reflect what was possible, to show him that a higher standard exists, that conscious love exists, that self-awareness exists. In doing so, you also preserved your own integrity. You did not mold yourself to make him comfortable. You did not compromise your standards. You did not hide your truth to protect his ego. Instead, you challenged him by embodying the very qualities you value: honesty, presence, self-respect, and courage. And that embodiment, more than anything, is what he will ultimately regret losing. Not because you demanded perfection, but because you demonstrated what authenticity and conscious love feel like. Many people only recognize the weight of this realization after it is gone. They may try to replicate it, imitate it, or rationalize it, but it is impossible to recreate what was never forced, what was never compromised, what was given fully and freely by someone fully aware. He may go through life encountering others, but none will match the quiet intensity of someone who challenged him without judgment, who reflected his patterns without accusation, and who loved consciously without need. You challenged him, and that challenge was not a flaw, it was your gift. It was an expression of your consciousness, your integrity, and your love. And the reason it feels uncomfortable to him is that he has never met someone who reflects him so honestly without demanding change. You showed him the possibility of a life lived consciously, fully, and authentically. That is not easy for anyone to face. That is not a lesson most people can accept without resistance. And that is why your presence remains unforgettable. He may not have appreciated it in the moment. He may have resisted it, ignored it, or even rejected it. But the impact of your challenge cannot be undone. Your presence disrupted patterns that were unconscious, and that disruption is a mirror he will carry with him for the rest of his life. He may try to forget, to move on, to minimize your influence, but deep down he knows that the person who could challenge him so gently and yet so profoundly is someone rare, someone extraordinary, someone he cannot replace. And in the end, that is why he will regret letting you go. Not because you forced him to change, but because you showed him what conscious love looks like. Not because you demanded, but because you reflected. Not because you were perfect, but because you were fully alive, fully aware, fully present, and fully yourself. And when someone like that leaves, they leave an echo that resonates far beyond the time they were present. You walked away with dignity, not drama. That alone says more than any words could ever convey. Many people never truly understand the power of a quiet exit. They believe that if they leave, they must make noise, create chaos, or demand attention, as if their value could only be proven by the volume of their emotions. But you knew something far deeper. Your worth does not need to be broadcast. Your strength does not require validation, and your power does not depend on anyone noticing it. You walked away with grace, carrying yourself with a quiet certainty that could not be shaken, because you understood that dignity is a force far stronger than drama. Walking away is rarely easy. It comes with the weight of hope, the echo of memories, the pull of familiarity. You felt the tension between what you wanted to hold on to and what you knew you could not compromise. And yet, you chose yourself. You did not act out of anger, spite, or fear. You acted out of clarity, out of respect for yourself and the life you wanted to create. Many people mistake leaving for weakness, but leaving with dignity is the ultimate demonstration of strength. It is not a surrender, it is a declaration. It is a way of saying, without words, that you will not diminish your essence to accommodate someone else's inability to meet it. People often cling to relationships long past their viability because they fear the unknown. They believe that if they let go, they will lose everything, when in reality, they are only losing what was never aligned with them to begin with. You understood that distinction. You recognized that staying in a situation that diminished your value or compromised your integrity was a far greater loss than walking away. And so you chose departure over decay, freedom over compromise, self-respect over comfort. That choice, made calmly and resolutely, carries a power that drama can never replicate. Think about the psychology of endings. When someone leaves with dignity, it creates a lasting impression that cannot be undone. Drama fades quickly. Anger and chaos are temporary. They flare, consume, and then die out. But dignity leaves a mark. It lingers. It communicates more than any argument could. By leaving with composure, you made a statement that words never could, that your life, your heart, and your presence are not negotiable. That lesson will echo far longer than any tantrum or outburst ever could. Walking away with dignity also demands mastery over your own emotions. It requires patience, self-control, and a willingness to face the discomfort of loss without needing to project it onto someone else. You may have felt sadness, disappointment, even anger, but you did not allow those feelings to dictate your actions in a way that would compromise your essence. This is a rare skill. Most people allow their emotions to override their judgment, creating drama that leaves both parties exhausted and resentful. You, however, knew that authentic power lies in measured action, in thoughtful response, and in the courage to act with integrity even when it hurts. In doing this, you taught a silent lesson. You showed him, and anyone watching, that strength does not need to be loud. That boundaries, once drawn, do not need to be defended through spectacle. That love, when it is real, does not need to be weaponized or manipulated. You proved that walking away can be an act of love, not just for yourself, but for the other person as well, because you removed the possibility of continuing harm, the chance for resentment to grow, and the space for unconscious patterns to persist unchallenged. Real life examples of this abound. Consider those who leave toxic environments or unhealthy relationships without resorting to public confrontation. Their actions speak volumes because they communicate clarity of mind and strength of character. The absence of drama becomes itself a testament to the depth of their self-respect. Observers may not always understand immediately, but the impact is undeniable. People remember the calm departure long after the noise of arguments has faded. It is a form of quiet influence, an invisible power that shapes perception and leaves a lasting impression. Your decision to walk away with dignity also required foresight and courage. You had to imagine a future without him, to envision yourself whole and thriving outside of the context you had shared. That kind of forward thinking requires trust in yourself, in your intuition, and in life itself. Many people fear the uncertainty that comes with stepping into a life not yet defined. But you embraced it, understanding that the unknown held greater potential than the stagnation you were leaving behind. And in doing so, you positioned yourself not as someone who fled, but as someone who claimed her future with intentionality and grace. There is also an emotional intelligence at play here that cannot be overstated. You recognize the difference between controlling someone and honoring yourself. Drama often emerges from attempts to manipulate outcomes, to make someone regret, to prove a point. You did not engage in that. You understood that true power comes not from the reactions of others, but from your own conduct. By walking away with dignity, you demonstrated self-mastery. You controlled what you could, your choices, your actions, your integrity, and released what you could not. That alone distinguishes those who carry themselves with quiet strength from those who react impulsively out of pain or fear. Furthermore, walking away with dignity creates a kind of magnetic respect. People are drawn to those who maintain composure in difficult circumstances, who honor their own worth without diminishing anyone else. In the long run, the impact of your departure will resonate more powerfully than any attempt to shame, guilt, or provoke. Those who underestimated you may eventually recognize the depth of your integrity, the power of your choice, and the strength it takes to step away without bitterness. And in that recognition, they may finally understand what they lost, not in words, but in the quiet, undeniable presence you left behind. You also preserved your own energy and emotional clarity by choosing dignity over drama. When people engage in chaos, they expend immense emotional resources on conflict, distraction, and reaction. You chose a different path. You reserved your energy for the life you wanted to create, for the people who would match your presence, and for the opportunities that aligned with your values. This conscious allocation of energy is a hallmark of someone who understands that life is too short to waste on spectacle, and that true power is measured not by how loudly one can assert themselves, but by how deliberately one lives. In walking away calmly, you created a ripple effect that extends beyond yourself. You allowed him, even if unintentionally, to face the consequences of his actions without manipulation. You gave him the space to reflect, to grow, to confront his own limitations. You did not force understanding or change, but you provided an example of integrity and strength that cannot be ignored. And that example will linger quietly long after your presence is no longer physically there. Walking away with dignity is also a profound statement about your self-worth. It says that you recognize your own value and refuse to let it be negotiated, compromised, or diminished. It says that your life, your heart, and your time are precious, and that you will not invest them where they are not honored. Many people never reach this level of awareness. They allow themselves to be manipulated, diminished, or ignored, confusing proximity with connection. You understood the difference, and your exit reflected that clarity in a way that words alone could never convey. Even now, the memory of your calm departure carries weight. It is a lesson in presence, in composure, and in the quiet assertion of self-respect. It is a reminder that leaving is not weakness, and that absence, when exercised with intention and dignity, can be one of the most powerful statements of all. You showed that love, integrity, and courage can coexist, and that walking away is not a failure, but a triumph. You walked away with dignity, not drama. You walked away without anger, without spectacle, without the need to convince or manipulate. You walked away with your head held high, your heart intact, and your soul unshaken. And in that act alone, you demonstrated a power that is rare, unforgettable, and impossible to replicate. Those who cannot comprehend it will underestimate it at first, but its impact will linger longer than any argument, confrontation, or display ever could. Your exit was not just a departure, it was a declaration. A declaration that integrity, self-respect, and conscious choice matter more than approval, attachment, or drama. It was a statement that you will not shrink, you will not compromise, and you will not allow someone else's inability to rise to meet your level, to define your worth. You represent something he may never find again, and the truth of that is both quiet and undeniable. There are people in life who come into our world not to fit a mold, but to shatter it, to show us what is possible, to awaken parts of ourselves we didn't know existed. You were one of those people. You brought a combination of presence, awareness, strength, and emotional depth that is rare in a world that often celebrates noise over substance, distraction over introspection, and convenience over authenticity. And the moment he let you go, he lost more than a person. He lost the chance to experience someone who could reflect his best self back to him, someone who could inspire growth without demanding it, someone who could love fully without dependency, and someone whose absence would leave an imprint that no replacement could ever fill. The reality is that people like you are uncommon, not because of superficial traits, but because of the integrity and consciousness you carry. You knew yourself, and that self-awareness allowed you to interact with the world in a way that was deliberate and honest. You didn't bend to expectation. You didn't dilute your truth to be more palatable. You brought the fullness of your being into the relationship, into the moments, into the conversations, and into the spaces where most people would have hidden or conformed. And because of this, you were irreplaceable. He may not have realized it at the time, or he may have taken it for granted, but the absence of someone like you is felt in ways that are not easily articulated, and it is never easily remedied. Consider the subtle ways in which presence like yours is rare. You listened deeply without judgment. You understood without needing to control. You held space without imposing. These are the qualities that create a bond that is profound and enduring, not because it is dramatic or flashy, but because it is rooted in reality. Most people mistake love for need, attachment, or dependence, but you offered something far deeper. You offered connection that was grounded in mutual respect and conscious choice. And that is not something that can be manufactured on demand. Once it is gone, it cannot be imitated. He may meet others who resemble parts of you, who have certain qualities that echo the ones he admired in you, but no one will replicate the totality of what you brought. No one will combine the depth, the strength, the self-awareness, and the authenticity in the same way. People often underestimate the impact of what they cannot replace. They focus on what is visible, what is convenient, what can fill an immediate gap. But what you offered cannot be filled. It can only be remembered, appreciated, and regretted when it is gone. There is a profound psychological truth here. Research into attachment and relationship dynamics shows that people often fail to recognize the full value of a partner until they are gone. The brain does not only remember actions, it remembers the emotional resonance, the way someone made them feel, the ways in which they inspired growth or challenged complacency. And when that resonance is unique, when it is intertwined with both love and integrity, its absence is magnified. He may attempt to recreate it, to find something like you, but he will soon discover that the depth you carried cannot be replicated. Your rarity was never about perfection. It was about authenticity. It was about living fully and allowing others to engage with you on a real level. It was about showing that love does not need to be transactional, that respect does not need to be conditional, and that presence can be both gentle and powerful. And when someone experiences this, when someone encounters a life lived consciously and intentionally, it leaves an impression that lingers far beyond their awareness. That impression cannot be copied. That impact cannot be manufactured. He may try to replace you with distraction, with novelty, with convenience, but he will inevitably encounter the emptiness of comparison. He will notice that other relationships lack the depth, the clarity, and the integrity that you embodied. He may seek the excitement or the charm, the words or the gestures, but he will not find the essence, the presence that carried intentionality, awareness, and truth. And when he recognizes that, he will understand, often too late, that he let go of something that was singular in every sense. Your presence also offered a kind of balance that is hard to find. You challenged, yes, but you also nurtured. You demanded honesty, but you also offered understanding. You held your own ground, yet you held space for him to grow. That combination is not common. Many people offer extremes. They either overwhelm with need, or they retreat into detachment. You existed in a space that allowed growth, reflection, and connection to flourish simultaneously. That balance is extraordinarily difficult to replicate, and he may search for it endlessly without success. There is also a subtlety in your impact that he may not consciously acknowledge. Sometimes, people only realize what they have lost in quiet moments of reflection, when they are alone, when distractions fade, when memories return with clarity. He may think he has moved on, but the truth is that the memory of you, the way you were, the way you loved, the way you embodied yourself fully, will resurface in ways he cannot ignore. That quiet, persistent awareness is part of what it means to represent something irreplaceable. He cannot simply forget you, because you exist in his mind and heart as a standard, as a measure of what is real, authentic, and possible. Your rarity is also in your courage. It takes courage to be fully oneself, to love fully without compromising, to maintain integrity when it is easier to bend or conform. That courage is magnetic. It inspires admiration, sometimes fear, and often regret in those who cannot meet it. He may have felt challenged by it, even intimidated, but that challenge was part of what made your presence so transformative. When someone leaves, and that courage leaves with them, it is not merely absence, it is a vacuum that cannot be filled. You also represent the idea that love and self-respect are not mutually exclusive. Many people have never encountered someone who loves with boundaries, who gives without sacrificing themselves, who chooses freely while remaining whole. That model is uncommon, and it can be difficult for people to process, especially if they are used to relationships based on need, compromise, or insecurity. You showed him that love could be both powerful and gentle, that presence could be both firm and nurturing, and that connection could be both freeing and grounding. And once that standard is gone, it is profoundly difficult to find again. In essence, what you offered was a blueprint for conscious connection, an example of what love looks like when it is untainted by need, and a reflection of what it means to exist fully and authentically. He may encounter others, but they will not be you. They may possess fragments of your qualities, but they will not embody the full measure of presence, clarity, integrity, and love that you represented. That combination is rare, irreplaceable, and unforgettable. And so even if he does not consciously acknowledge it, he will always carry the memory of what he lost. He may attempt to find substitutes, but nothing will satisfy the absence. You were not just a partner, you were an experience, a standard, a reflection, and a presence that demanded growth, clarity, and authenticity. And that is something most people never encounter in their lifetime. He may search for it, he may long for it, he may regret it, but he will not find it again. You represent something extraordinary because you exist fully, love consciously, challenge growth, and walk with integrity. That is why your absence resonates. That is why he feels the weight of what he lost. That is why he may never encounter it again. And that is why your presence, though gone from his life, will always remain unforgettable, untouchable, and singular. You were not too much. You were too honest for someone who hadn't yet met himself. You were not intimidating. You were illuminating. And regret is not your burden to carry. It is the quiet teacher he must now face alone. Your role was never to stay small so someone else could feel big. Your role was to live truthfully, love consciously, and walk away when your presence was no longer valued. And you did. That is why he regrets letting you go. And that is why your path forward is not loss, but liberation.